In this video, you're going to wrap up the conversion process for the Notes application. By the end, we'll have the final converted project complete. Let's go ahead and kick things off by closing all of the open files, and I want to open just a single file, that is Notes functions from the old project. Now, some of the functions inside of here we've already accounted for. Things like get saved notes, save notes, and remove note, they have a companion over in the new project, in that Notes module. But others, like generate note DOM, render notes, and finally generate last edited, those three functions, they do not have a companion in the new project. So we're going to go ahead and start by fixing that. Over in the source directory, let's go ahead and create a brand new file. So we're going to make a new module that can be required throughout our application. And we're going to call this one views.js. And in here, we're going to end up adding and exporting those three functions. First up, let's go ahead and get all three functions over in this file. I'm going to grab generate last edited, copy that over to the new views module. Up above, I'm going to grab render notes and copy that as well. I'll add that before generate last edited. And then finally, the third function up top. Right here, we have generate note DOM. I'm going to grab this as well, bringing it over to the views file. Up top, I'll paste that in. Now we can focus on two things, figuring out what imports we need in this file and exporting the correct stuff. The exporting is super easy, so let's knock that out first. Down below, we're just going to export the three things we added in. Export, three named exports. The first is generate note DOM. The second is render notes. And finally, we have generate last edited. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and talk about some of the stuff we're going to need to import. Does this file use UUID? And the answer is no, but it does use Moment. So we need to make sure Moment is in scope by adding an import statement in this file. Up top, I am going to import Moment from the Moment library. That's going to ensure that the function that requires Moment is actually going to work as expected when executed in the browser. Now, of our three functions, only one is going to need to undergo some sort of change. Generate note DOM is perfectly fine as it is. We're not going to change a single line of code. And the same is true for generate last edited. We are, however, going to make some changes to render notes. Currently, render notes takes in two arguments, the notes array and the filters object. So when we call render notes, which we do quite a few times, we have to pass that information over and over again. It's a bit redundant. Now that we have those two interfaces, one for notes and one for filters, this function code can simply request the latest notes and the latest filters, then go through the process of rendering. It does not need to have them passed in. So let's go ahead and actually adjust render notes to do that. I'm going to start by removing both arguments. The new render notes function isn't going to take any arguments whatsoever. Let's go ahead and kick things off by getting access to the filters. So const filters equals, we're going to use the get filters function that we've already set up and actually tested. We'll make sure to import that in just a second. The other thing we need are the notes. Now we already have some code that actually does this. We have a variable notes getting reassigned. This was working when we had the notes global. We no longer have that. So I'm just going to switch this over to a local variable by adding const up front. And for clarity's sake, I'll take the note element one, move that up top. Then I have filters and notes back to back. Perfect. Now it's important to remember, we also changed sort notes to take just a single argument. Sort notes is able to fetch the notes on its own. It does not need them passed in. All we have to pass in is the correct sort by filter. So now we have the modified version of render notes. And what are we going to do? We're just going to set up those imports. Let's go ahead and take things up top. Right here, we have to grab those two things from those two files. First up, I will import the named export get filters. I'm going to grab that from /filters. Then we are going to import sort notes. And I am going to grab that from right here, /notes. Excellent. And that brings us to the last thing we needed to change in this file. Render notes is now completely functional, and we are ready to start integrating Notes app into index.js. That's going to require us to use everything we've built so far, and this is where we'll actually see the user interface start working once again. Let's go ahead and start by taking everything in the Notes app file, copying it to the clipboard, I mean every single line, and then pasting it over in index.js. I am going to leave those import calls in place for the moment, as we will likely be importing at least something into this file. Then what are we going to do? I'm just going to paste that code in as it was. Now there are a couple of things we can change right off the bat. The first is to remove use strict. We already know that Babel is going to take care of that for us. As we move down the list, we can see the next thing we do is we create that notes variable. Now let's look at the real reasons we created the notes variable in this file. I needed to pass it into render notes, I needed to pass it into save notes, and I had to add my note by using notes.push. None of these are necessary anymore with our new system in place. Instead, we can just go ahead and use some of the functions we've created. That means we can go ahead and start making some pretty drastic changes to this file. I'm going to delete notes and filters altogether. Now this render notes call is going to stay. We're just no longer going to pass anything in. Remember, we just set up render notes to fetch the data it needs in order to actually render the notes. Now that's not the only render notes call we have in this file. There are actually 3 others. Let's go ahead and make sure that we actually remove the arguments for all of them. While we're on the topic of render notes, currently it's not imported into this file. It's going to be important to actually add that. Let's get that done. I'm going to import render notes, and I'm going to grab that from right here, /views. Excellent. So now render notes is going to work as expected. Next up on our list is the ability to create a note. So right here, we have a whole bunch of code for creating and saving the created note. None of this is actually necessary anymore, since we now have a single, simple create note function that we can use. Now here's the catch. This stuff highlighted is stuff that we are already addressing with the create note function, but this one line down below still needs to run. The create note code doesn't actually do this. Now, we might not want to redirect the user every single time they make a new note. I could easily imagine another interface where I don't want to get that done. Maybe I want to show the note in a modal on the same page so they can edit it right there. There are all sorts of use cases for wanting to do one thing and not the other. So I'm not going to just take this line and copy it over to create note. I'm going to let create note be focused just on creating and adding data to that array. So I'm going to remove all of the highlighted stuff. Then I am going to call create note. Now clearly there's a problem here. We are expecting an ID so we can actually redirect them to the correct location. If I go over to that file, that would be the notes.js file, and go up to create note, we can see that we currently do not return anything. We could, however, change that. I could return whatever I needed to actually access. So for example, right here, I could use return ID to make sure the caller of create note got the ID of the newly created note. I could now save notes.js, close that file down, and over here, I could now expect that return value. Const ID equals whatever comes back from create note. So when we create an interface like the one for notes or for filters, it's really up to us to determine how it should work. If we need the ID, we could add it in. If we find ourselves not needing any return value, it's perfectly fine to do that as well, like we are currently doing with render notes. Now there are still a couple other things we're going to change in this file. Down below, we have 2 lines of code in those 2 event handlers that are changing the filters. There's no longer a global filters we can access. We're going to have to use the set filters function instead. So right here, I am going to call set filters. I'm going to pass in the object, which it expects. I'm then going to set search text equal to, and we're still going to use the exact same value. So right here, e.target.value. Awesome. Now we can remove this line, and we can add our second set filters call down below. So right here, set filters, passing in an object. We are going to set sort by this time, e.target.value, exactly as we had before. Excellent. This brings us to the final event listener for this file. This one listens for that storage event, and as we explored previously in the course, we know this allows us to keep our notes synced across tabs. Currently, this line 28, is completely redundant and actually can be removed. We no longer have that notes global, and we know that render notes is going to get the latest data anyways, so we can actually change it to this. We still want to listen for the storage event. We still only want to call render notes when it's actually the notes that are being updated. Imagine we added other fields later on. And then when the notes are updated, we just call render notes with no arguments. The last thing we need to do in this file is remove the imports that we're not using. There's nothing wrong with importing something you're not using, but it's best practice to just import the stuff you're actually using. Currently, I am not using get filters, so we can remove that. I am using set filters. I am using render notes. From the notes module, I'm just using create note. So I can remove the get notes function. I can also remove the import for remove notes and update note. We'll be using those two in our other page. And there we go. We have a final and complete index.js file. Whoops, there's a little typo right here. That should be set filters with a capital F. Now, if I go ahead and save the file, in the background, we should see our application refresh. And here we go. We have our data being pulled from local storage. I can sort by last edited. I could sort by recently created. I could then filter, for example, searching for notes that have title in the title. If I type in more characters that match no notes, I get my no notes message showing up. So the index page is now working really, really well. That brings us to the other page, which currently isn't working at all, the edit page. To get over there, I am going to create a brand new note, allowing us to test this functionality as well. I click it. I do see a new ID was created. I'm brought over to the page successfully, and now it's time to wire up this page. So let's go ahead and go through the same process we just did for this one. I'm going to take all of the code in Notes Edit from the old project. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. I'm then going to close that tab and paste all of it inside of edit.js. Then we're going to go through that conversion process. So yeah, we're going to have to add some imports once again, and we're going to have to make the same changes, well, similar changes, that we made to index.js. Let's start by deleting use strict, which you probably expected. Down below that, we have 4 variables for our 4 elements. Then we have the note ID variable. All those are going to stay in place, but then we have this code right here. This code fetches the latest notes. It then finds the correct note. If there was no correct note, it redirects us. And if there was a correct note, it continues on. It sets up the title, the body, and the date element so we can actually see the note values over in the user interface. If you remember when we first set up this file, we basically had the exact same code down below too. When local storage changed, we needed to reinitialize the page. So we initialized the page up above, and then we also initialized the page down below. When we're trying to do the same thing twice, it is a use case for a function. So let's go ahead and actually convert it over to one. Over in views, we're going to create one new function, then this file will be complete as well. Let's call this one something like initialize edit page. We can set this up as a regular old arrow function, and then down below we can export it so we can actually import it from the other file. Right here, initialize edit page, perfect. Now, when it comes to the function itself, it's essentially going to take care of everything we have highlighted over here. What does this code really need access to? It needs access to 2 things. It needs access to the note ID, so it can actually find the correct one, and it needs access to the element variables we're creating above. So let's go ahead and take that into account as we take this code and move it over to that file. I'm going to cut out the highlighted code here, all the way up from notes down to us changing the date element. Then I'm going to paste that code directly inside of initialize edit page. Now we do still need access to the note ID, so I'm going to have that be the one and only argument for this function. Right here, note ID. So that'll get passed in. We can then access it where we currently access it. The other thing we need, those actual element variables, we can just copy those over. So I'm going to take all 4, copy them to the clipboard, and bring them over to this function. We can add them as the first thing in the function. And we actually only need these 3, title element, body element, and date element. So I can remove the remove element selector that is not necessary for this file. Now let's go ahead and work on converting the rest of this function. On the very next line, we use the getSavedNotes function. That function no longer exists. We now have getNotes. So let's go ahead and switch that over to a call to getNotes. And this is something we also need to import since it's not from this file. So up at the very top, we can tack that on right here. After sortNotes, getNotes, excellent. Down below, we can now continue on with that function. Now we use notes down below and we use note down below where both of them are declared, but neither of them are ever reassigned. So we can actually switch both of these from being let over to const. Remember, it would have worked if we had the code using let, but it's best to default to const and switch to let if you need to reassign its value. If you're not reassigning the value, there's no need to switch to let. So these lines are now working and they're going to work just fine in this new function. Down below, we still check if there is note and redirect if there isn't. And then down below that, we set up the correct element values. All of that is going to stay exactly as we have it at the moment. We can now save views.js. This function is all wrapped up. And over inside of edit.js, we can now use it. So up above, we are going to have to import this new function that we're going to end up using twice. Right here, import. We're going to import something from the following file. That's ./views. That should be from, not form. And what are we trying to import? We're trying to import initialize edit page. And we're going to use that down below. I'm going to use it once right here to initialize the page when it first loads. And we're going to use it again down below when local storage changes. So right here, I'll call it initialize edit page, passing in the one argument it expects, the note ID. Then down below, we can take all of the code inside of this if statement and delete it. So we still want to listen for the storage event. We still want to do something when it was the notes value that changed, but all we're going to do is call that function. Initialize edit page, passing in the note ID. Awesome. So that is the hard stuff for edit.js. The other stuff really isn't that bad. We have our 3 event listeners for title, body, and remove. Let's go ahead and actually knock those out. First up, we have title element. Right here, what do? We set a new title and a new updated at property. If you remember, we created a function called update note that takes care of all of this for us. So we don't have to manually do this, or call save notes down below. Let's go ahead and start by importing it, then we'll use it. So import the function we've already tested, update note, and we're going to grab that from ./notes down below. We're going to go ahead and call it. Calling update note with the 2 arguments it expects. Remember, the first one was the ID of the note we're trying to change. We have that stored on note ID. The second one was the updates object, where we can choose to specify either the title or body properties, or we could specify both if needed. Right here, we're just updating the title, so I'll set title equal to e.target.value awesome. Because of the new situation we've set up for ourselves with the update note function, we can now remove these 3 lines, those 2 right there, and the 1 line down below. Now, clearly, we are running into an issue. We are expecting to be able to use note.updatedAt when we call generate last edited, but we don't have a note variable. We could fix that by returning the updated note from this function. So right here, I could say, hey, I want to get the note back so I can use the function like this. All we would need to do is actually change its implementation. So over inside of notes.js, we can find the function we're trying to change. Down below, we have update note. At the very end, all I'm going to do is return the note object. Now we can save notes.js, and edit.js is actually going to work correctly. We're going to end up doing something very similar down below for editing the body. So let's go ahead and knock that one out right here. Const note equals. We're going to call update note, passing in the necessary arguments. The first one is the note ID. The second one is our updates object. And this time around, we're trying to update the body, and I'm trying to set its value to the value from e.target.value. Perfect. Once again, we can remove those 3 lines. They become unnecessary with our new setup. Awesome. The last one we have inside of here is remove note. Now we do still have a remove note function that works exactly as we're calling it here. The one difference is that it saves the notes for us, so we actually don't need to call save notes directly. We can simply rely on it saving the note after it removes it. Up above, we are going to have to import that, so let's change line 2. After we import update note, we're going to have to import remove note as well. Perfect. And that wraps up this file, and that wraps up the application. Now, there is a chance that you or I have small typos, and those are perfectly fine and expected when we're going through the refactoring process. So all we can really do is cross our fingers and save the file. We know that from a structural standpoint, things are sound. We just might have some small typos that need to be addressed. Over here, it looks like things are good so far. No errors in the console. Let's try to change things. I'm going to change the title. This is new. And I can see that right here, I'm trying to use generate last edited, but it's not defined. This is from edit.js. So that's line 16, which lives right here. Now, obviously, once I see this error, I can realize what I did wrong. I just didn't import this function. There's no need to be worried about it. All you have to do is add the import in place. Generate last edited. And this is a very natural process when refactoring. You make changes to your files, but you don't nail it on the first time. You get about 99% of the way there, but you have to go back and forth at the end to tweak a few things. This is okay. I do this every single day when working on client projects. So once again, let's try to change that title. Testing, this time no errors. I'll change the body as well. My new body. I'll then go over to the home page, and I see that note showing up. I click it, it brings me back, and I have my values populated. Last up, I can choose to remove the note completely, and I can see that note is not defined. So once again, we are running into a small issue. This time, it's on edit.js line 27. If I scroll to that, what's going wrong, I have remove note. It's expecting note.id. That no longer exists. This is from the old code. So clearly I know what I need to do. I just need to reference note.id, which is the new place this value is stored. So once again, we can go ahead and save things and see what happens. I'm back at the note page. Let's try to remove the note one more time. And there we go. The note has been removed. Now, I could have gone back and refilmed those last two errors to not happen. I could have pretended I'm perfect and given you a false sense of what it's really like to develop. But in reality, people run into small errors like that all the time. No need to beat yourself up about it. All you got to do is fix the error and then continue on. So at this point, what do we have? We have the final version of our Notes application. It's using Babel. It's using Webpack. It's using JavaScript modules, third-party libraries, and more. Before we move on to the next video, let's go ahead and close down all of the open files. Inside of the public folder, we have our scripts directory. This has bundle.js, but remember, the new system we've set up is never actually going to generate that file, so let's go ahead and delete it. We can go ahead and see what we actually do get by running the other script we created, by running the build script. So over in the terminal, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the dev server, what we've been using so far. I will run npm run build. This is going to generate our production build, and we're going to be able to take a look at the output. So once again, the production build takes a bit more time to generate, and that's okay because we only do it every so often. It's not like we're trying to make a change and see it on the fly. We're just running this thing maybe once or twice a day. It looks like we're all done. If I switch over to the editor, what do we get? We get our bundle files, one for each HTML page, and we get our source map files as well. We are now ready to deploy this app to production. You could do that by taking the public folder and deploying it. Now that we have the Notes app converted, we can also remove the Notes app old directory. All of this code is now accounted for somewhere in the new application, so we're not going to lose anything by deleting it. And that brings us to the end of this video and the end of the conversion process for this app. Now, if this felt a bit overwhelming, that's okay. We're moving around a lot of code. There are a lot of shifting parts. We're going to get a bit more experience with this process in the next several videos by doing the exact same thing for the To-Do application. The good news is that the To-Do app is going to be a bit easier to convert since it just has a single HTML file. I'm really excited to get to that. Let's go ahead and jump right in.